Welcome to Pregnant Tea, your cozy corner in the world of pregnancy where we sip on stories, wisdom, and the occasional cup of actual tea. I'm your host, Kendra Pace from Natural State Wellness. Each week, we brew up candid conversations with mothers who've walked the path you're on, sharing their triumphs, challenges, and everything in between. We also invite professionals to spill the tea on tips, tricks, and techniques for each stage of pregnancy. We'll be talking about everything from prenatal care to postpartum recovery. So whether you're a first-time mom-to-be or a seasoned pro, grab your favorite mug and settle into your comfiest chair as we venture into this crazy and wonderful world of pregnancy together. Today on Pregnant Tea, we have Katie. And she is a mom. She also owns a luxury wedding invitation business called Foiled and Pressed. They make beautiful, beautiful, beautiful wedding stationery. So make sure to check them out. But I'm going to have her dive into her birth stories today. So you can tell us a little bit about yourself, about your family, and we'll go from there.
Thanks. So thanks for having me. My husband and I were best friends in college and then started dating after college. So we've been together since we were 22. Wow. And we have a dog who has been with us the entire time. And now we have two boys. Colton is 4 and Caleb is 17 months. So Colton's pregnancy was interesting. So from the time that we started trying to when he was born was 3 years.
Okay.
So about 2 years in, my husband had developed some health things and we had a lot going on, moves and all of that. So we were kind of like, all right, do we go to a fertility clinic? So we did that. The week before my 33rd birthday, I was back and forth from these fertility clinic offices doing all these kind of invasive, unpleasant tests. And one of them is you have to lay on this metal table. And they were like, yeah, it's going to be a little painful. And they tell you to hold on to this bar and then they hand you a stress ball. And I was like, what? Am I like in 6th grade? What is this?
Oh
like, am I a kid here? Like, you want me to hold the stress ball? Okay. So basically what they do is they pry you open and shoot dye through your tubes and take photos to see what your tubes look like. So they do this and I'm like, oh, this really is painful.
Oh,
It's not nice. And the camera stopped, it froze. So they were like, oh, we have to reset it. So
no.
What would have been like 30 seconds was like several minutes long. And I was like, okay, this is really, really, really uncomfortable.
Oh my gosh. And just wide open to the world.
Yeah, you're in this room with like, the doctor and like a couple of, you're just like wide open and you're like pried open. It is not comfortable and you're holding on to your stress ball.
Were you happy for the stress ball at that point? Or
like, I guess it's beneficial. But yeah, I was like, okay, can we be done with this now? So they do that. And then I had some other less memorable tests. But then a few weeks later, we go back and they're like, yeah, we don't see anything wrong. And we're like, okay. And they, go over options of IVF and IUI. And we're like, all right, well, we're going to just have to like think about this. And then the next cycle, I found out I was pregnant.
Oh.
So fast forward while I was pregnant with Colton, I kept hearing people tell me that people get pregnant after having fertility testing and things done. And I was like, why is that the case? And she was like, oh, well, that test, when they push the dye through your tubes, can clean out your tubes and make it easier for you to get pregnant. And I was like, oh, she's like, a doctor won't tell you that. But she's like, I've seen it happen a lot. And I was like, oh, okay.
Interesting.
So that's interesting. So yeah, just little, I was like, all right.
That's good to know. Yeah. Like, the pain was worth it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it was great that we didn't have to move forward with anything else.
Right.
And my pregnancy with Colton, it was stressful because it took us so long to get pregnant. And then I enjoy pregnancy and feeling the baby. And I always felt pretty good. I was wheezy in the first trimester, but I wasn't horribly sick or anything. I was with a midwifery practice and the one midwife was like, oh, well, you're on the tinier side. So I think we're going to do a bunch of ultrasounds, like extra ultrasounds to make sure the baby's growing properly. And like, you don't know what you don't know. So I was like, okay.
Right.
But they kept finding things that weren't really there in the ultrasounds. And then they would send me to get a level 2 ultrasound. So we'd be stressed out that the baby had something. And then the level 2 ultrasound, they would be like, oh no, everything's fine. This baby looks perfect.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of weird up and downs. You know, thankfully everything was fine.
Yeah.
But they kept just finding weird things. I mean, I was, I think, 2 weeks before my due date, and we had the final ultrasound, and the tech told the one midwife, like, I think it looks like one of the baby's legs might be shorter than the other. I was like, I've had so many ultrasounds. I feel like they would have seen this before. And the midwife was like, yeah, she was like, I'm not sending you for another ultrasound. This is like, basically like, she was like, this is crazy.
Okay.
Like,
thank goodness.
Yeah, she was awesome. She was like the one midwife in the practice who I really liked. And she was close to retiring, had been around, was just like, I'm just going to tell you like it is.
Love that.
So I'm just going to tell it like it is.
That's my dream practitioner.
Yeah, she was awesome. So she was just like, no, I'm not sending you for another ultrasound. And I was like, even if it was, we wouldn't do anything else anyway.
I was going to say, like, so what if it was?
Yeah, like that's not going to affect anything anyway. So it was a lot. I was at 40 weeks and 3 days, and I had to go in for my non-stress test. You sit there and they hook you up to a monitor on your belly, and they check the baby's heart rate, make sure the baby is not in any type of stress. Because I had hit 40 weeks, and they were like, all right, we're going to hook you up to this thing. So you're on it for like, I don't know, half an hour or an hour. I don't even remember. You're just sitting in a room hooked up to this machine, and they look at it and they're like, the baby's having D cells. And I was like, okay. It's like the heart rate doesn't look quite right. I don't know if it's the same as skipped beats or if that was an additional thing. So they were like, okay, well, we're going to send you to the hospital, and their machine is better, and we'll just see what happens. I was like, okay. And I'm still like, they're going to send me home. I'm not in labor. They go to the hospital, and they hook me up to this, and they're like, yeah, the baby's having D cells. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, and they check me, and they're like, well, you're 4 centimeters. And I was like, okay. But I wasn't having any contractions. I was not in labor. And I was like, so are you going to send me home? And the doctor on call comes in, and she's like, so we're concerned that the placenta might be getting a little bit old, and that might be why the baby's heart rate doesn't look perfect, but the baby is healthy now, and we think you should stay, and we should have this baby. So we were like, okay, monitor, but don't go home. Basically, she was like, I'm concerned that if you go home and we're not keeping an eye on the baby, that something could happen. So we were like, all right, I guess we're staying here. And this was March of 2020. So it was absolute insanity.
Tough times.
Yeah, it was insanity. Nobody knew what was going on. Some nurses are coming in with masks on. I'm like, why do you have a mask on? Some aren't, which was fine. But everybody is just confused, and everything was just felt so heavy because nobody knew what was going on. And I mean, leading up to us going into the hospital, the OB nurse was calling me saying, do whatever you can to go into labor because your husband might not be able to be with you at the hospital. They keep making more restrictions. It was 2 people could be in the room with you. Now there's 1 person. Now they're threatening that nobody can be in the room with you. So I'm on the floor. It was awful. I was on the floor of my living room, just like crying and freaking out that my husband wasn't going to be able to be with me for the birth of our first child, and I was going to have to do it on my own. And nurses are wonderful, but I didn't know those nurses. Right. So it's not the same.
It's not the same.
So it was just really stressful. Going to the hospital was really stressful and everything. So they're like, yeah, we're just going to hang out and wait for this baby to come. And I was like, all right. And before I had left my midwife's office, they swept my membranes. So with Colton, I was not prepared for labor and delivery. I was listening to podcasts about what to do when the baby was born, reading books and all that about making sure I had the right stuff. I was so naive. And like, okay, what do I do when the baby's here? But like, totally,
like that's so common.
It is.
Because
crazy.
You're like, oh, my body's like, I'm just going to know what to do in the middle of it. And that'll be that.
And like, yeah, your body knows what to do, but your brain doesn't know what to do.
There's a lot of hesitations there.
Yeah, like you're not mentally prepared.
Right.
And I mean, one of the really great takeaways I took from the Ina May's Guide to Childbirth when I read it later, went my second, was that like, we don't grow up in villages now. We're not attending births anymore. So we don't really have experiences of other people having babies. We're not really mentally prepared for it. And so it's not just instinct. It's not just magical instinct. This is learned behavior when you watch and become comfortable with watching other people have their babies and then become comfortable with it yourself. Your body kind of knows what to do, but like mentally, if you're stressed out,
what's happening?
Yeah, if you're stressed out, which I was incredibly stressed out between like going into labor with my first baby and then all of the crazy COVID March 2020 madness going on. It was incredibly stressful. It's hard to go into labor with all of that and expect your body to like open up and do what it's supposed to do.
Absolutely.
So we're like, okay, I guess we're having this baby. And so we were just hanging out at the hospital, and then that was mid-afternoon. And then I think around 6, one of the midwife who was on call came in and she was like, okay, I think we should break your water. And I was like, okay, I guess we can do that. I was like, very like, I don't want Pitocin. Somebody had mentioned, oh, you're overdue. Maybe. And I was like, no, I don't want Pitocin. Like, I don't want to be induced. But I was like, okay, if you think we should break my water, all right. Again, like didn't have a ton of knowledge about it. So she breaks my water and I was so naive. I'm like, well, my husband ran home to let the dog out. So I was like, he's not here right now. I was like, okay, like that you're breaking my water.
Right. How would you know?
Yeah. And she's like, oh yeah, you'll be fine. I'm like, okay. So we're just hanging out in the hospital room and went to sleep. And I woke up around 2:00 in the morning with contractions and labored in the room, sat on the bouncy ball thing. And then a few hours later, this nurse she was lovely. And she's like, maybe we can go in the jet tub down the hall. Right. So okay.
That's nice that they had one of those.
Yeah. So they had one of those. So I was like, all right. She's like, I think, cause by then I was in pain and she's like, I think this will be good. So we go down the hall and it's maybe like 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. By the time I like got myself down there and I get in this tub and I think I thought it was going to be more pleasant than it was. Like I was in so much. I think it probably would have been if I had been in a different like headspace.
Sure.
And so she hands my husband like a cup and she was like, pour water over her during contractions. That usually kind of helps to have that like, distraction of the water. And so he's like practically sleeping on the side of the jacuzzi tub. I'd have to be like, babe, I'm having another contraction. And he'd pick up the cup and pour the water over me. And then he'd sleep for another 2 minutes.
Oh, teamwork.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. So he was exhausted and laboring away. And, you hear like, okay, you can be in labor for 2 days. And they had broken my water. So they were like, basically, you have 24 hours to have this baby out before it's chance of infection and all of that. So I was like, okay. And then I got out of the tub and went back down the hall and they checked me and I was 6 centimeters. I started at 4. I had been laboring from 2:00 to, I don't know, mid-morning, I guess. And they were like, you're at 6 centimeters. And I was like, okay. Not moving super quickly at all. I did not want an epidural. I did not want any medication. I really, in my head, thought that I was going to, instincts kick in and I'll just be fine. I've done yoga before. I know breathing techniques, I'll be fine. All right. Well, it's not the same. So I was just not prepared. So I'm trying to get through these contractions and I just could not breathe through them. And my husband and I don't know what we're doing. And the nurse is trying to be helpful, but she has other things that she needs to do. And so she can only do so much. Right. So I'm, trying to breathe through contractions and she's trying to coach me on how to breathe through them, but I'm, getting all hitchy and just it's not working. And the midwife comes in and she's like, I know this isn't what you wanted, but I think we should do an epidural and just let your body relax and open up. And because you've stalled. I was in so much pain. I was just like, okay. So they do the epidural, which I will say, not not super pleasant trying to hold yourself still during contractions while they put a needle in your back. Epidural kicks in and my body did relax, although I was freezing. I was laying on the table and the nurses brought in like every blanket they had in the whole wing of the hospital. So I was like, they're like, are you still cold? I was like, yes, I'm still cold. And I'm hooked up to these monitors the whole time to check on the baby's heart rate. So I'm on these monitors. They kept having to shift me because they'd be like, oh, the baby doesn't really like this spot, and they'd have to shift me. So my body was relaxed, but I wasn't able to really rest because I was constantly being moved around. So they're doing that, and they were like, well, you'll probably hit another centimeter every hour, which is exactly what happened. So by, I think, 6 p.m., I had hit 10 centimeters, and they were like, okay, we can start pushing now. They put on the brightest lights that I've ever seen in my life. I'm one of those people that gets migraines around really bright lights. So I'm like, okay, okay, I'm blinded, but it's fine.
Must we?
Yeah, they like
put on a headlamp.
They like put down these crazy lights, and like I'm like, okay, I didn't even know that those lights are in the ceiling. I was like, the baby's not coming out right this second. Like, that would be great, but I don't think that's the case.
Oh.
So
just not comfy.
No, it was not great. And my body's exhausted because I'm doing this, and it's like 2:00 in the morning now. I have all this medication, and it was a lot. They're like, okay, you're gonna push. And in my head, you don't push for that long. Well, that was not the case. So I'm pushing. After, I want to say an hour maybe, the one doctor was like, let's try this vacuum thing to get the baby out and or get him to progress. Or we didn't even know that it was a him at the time because we didn't know if we were having a boy or girl. But let's use this vacuum to see if we can get the baby to progress. And I was like, okay, again, you don't know what you don't know. She goes to use this vacuum and like attaches it to the baby's head because the baby was crowning. Which I thought when the baby was crowning, the baby was going to be out. No, that's not the case at all. Like, the baby was not even close to coming out at that point. So she tries this, and she thought that the vacuum wasn't actually getting any suction because he didn't move. And so she gets another one, and it turns out, I don't know, he may have been stuck, or he was just in a tough position, or like, I don't know. To this day, I don't know. And like, I never really got an answer. So no one
debriefed that.
Yeah, nobody really like had an answer for me. So she's like, well, we can do a C-section, or you can keep pushing. I really did not want to have a C-section. So I'm like, and I was trying to ask for answers. Like, the midwife was in and out. She kept leaving the room. She just didn't seem very present at all. And then the doctor who was on call was there, and I had 2 or 3 nurses with me at that point. I kept being like, is this going to be possible? I just want to know. I know they can't really tell you, but when you're in that state, right? I'm just like, am I just pushing for no reason? Am I making any progress? And when I pushed well, there would be a little bit of progress, but it was 1 step forward and 2 steps back. The monitors are still on, so the heart rate is still doing weird things. And they finally were like, the doctor kept really wanting to do a C-section. The midwife really wouldn't really give me an answer about, like, she was just like, oh, whatever the attending says. And I was like, oh, okay.
You're here for me.
Yeah, I was just kind of like, okay, this, and it was weird. At one point they did put the towel, the little scratchy blanket on my chest. I feel like there was just a lot of miscommunication going on. There were a lot of people in the room, which was very uncomfortable for me. As we were getting closer to either the baby was going to come or there was going to be a C-section, there was a group of nurses in the corner, and they're all chatting about their lunch that day. And this is a big deal for me. I had never been in labor before. I'm having this baby. And I was just like, okay, like, I get you do this every day, but can you go in the hallway because this is super distracting? And, as much as I could block out a lot of stuff because I was in pain and I was in labor pushing, it was so distracting to have them standing there talking about what they did that day. Can you guys up in the hallway? Yeah. You're in labor, you're in pain, you can't really vocalize. It's not shocking that my body didn't open up. What if he was stuck? He may have just been stuck. I never really got an answer. I don't really know if that was the case. But it's not shocking that my body didn't open up enough to push him out. So we ended up doing the C-section. They rushed me down the hall, and because it was just getting to the point where it was just kind of sketchy between the heart rate and everything else. So they rushed me into the OR and get him out. So they took him out. my husband hesitated because we both really thought we were having a boy. So when he was going to do the announcement, he was like, it's that. And I think he was just so in shock that the baby had arrived that he paused and then he was like, it's a boy. And I was like, okay, like I knew that. Okay, great. And that's great. He's here. But he didn't cry. So I was like, what's going on? I can't see anything. The drape is like up. I think they didn't lower it enough. Like I didn't see him. So they held him up, but I didn't see him. So the drape was still too high for me to see. So I don't know what's going on. They take him, and Rich is next to me, crouched down next to me. He sees what's going on. He was just like, it's okay. It's okay. They were giving the baby oxygen and trying to get him to be more responsive. And I didn't know that. I'm like, why isn't the baby over here? And he's like, you're okay. He's just with the nurses. It's okay. But it was hard. And I also didn't really know how much time had gone by either, because I'm like, I'm still on drugs and they're stitching me up and everything. And so they get him. He told me after the fact that he heard one of the nurses say, come on, little guy. And I was like, oh my God, like what? It's just insane. So, but he was okay. They did his first APGAR test, which did not go well.
Yeah.
But the second one, he plumped up, his skin tone came up, and he was responsive and everything. So then the next one is so the first one is at 1 minute and the second one is at 5 minutes, I believe. Then he was good. And then they brought him over. So that was the first time I saw him. It was 6-7 minutes after he was born. It was the first time I actually saw him. And the nurse brought him over to me, but I couldn't hold him. I was starting to get a little shaky. We have a video and my hand is just like shaking. And so she held him on my shoulder, close to on my chest, on my shoulder, because I was like, I want to do some skin time. Right. It's that special time when you hold the baby. And I so badly wanted to be given the baby and just hold the baby, right? And like I couldn't, because I started really shaking really badly. I was nauseous. I remember at one point the doctor was like, oh, she can hold the baby. And I remember being like, I can't hold him. It's not safe for me to hold him because I was shaking so badly. And I was nauseous. And then they brought me into another room. It's like so fuzzy. Like I'm sure all these things it's so fuzzy. And what a whirlwind. Yeah, exactly. And so they realized that I was starting to not do well. So they took the baby and my husband out of the room, and they were, I guess one of the nurses, she was wonderful, and she was like, come with me. Let's go weigh the baby together and measure the baby together. So they go. So my husband was like, okay, well, and like he didn't realize what was going on, but my vitals were all over the place. They couldn't figure out what was going on with that, and they're trying to figure out what's going on with me. And I think, I mean, nobody really gave me a straight answer. It was very strange the next day. And I think it was a lot of the COVID stuff. There was just so much, policies were changing in the hospital hourly. Right. It was just insanity. So I never really got a real answer as to what happened, but my vitals were all over the place. They ended up, I was like, I can't function like this. I was so horribly uncomfortable is not the right word, but I was shaking uncontrollably. I felt absolutely awful. I was like, knock me out. The person who hates medication was like, knock me out. I cannot function like this. I can't do it. I can't hold my kid. I don't know what's going on. And I remember talking and nobody could hear me. It was so strange. The whole thing was so strange. It was an out-of-body experience. So anyway, I don't remember anything until the next morning. I don't remember the first time I held Colton. I don't remember the first time I nursed him. I have pictures, which took pictures, but like, I don't remember any of those things. So my body did not react well to the C-section and the medication and all of that stress for whatever reason. So yeah, I don't remember any of those things. And I think they woke me up at like 3 a.m. to nurse him again. And that's when I remember the nurse came in and she helped me latch him. And that's when I remember actually being able to hold my baby. And you had that special, yeah. But I was like, what happened? It was just, I can't even imagine how you were feeling. Wild. It was so wild. What happened? I was so grateful that he was here and doing well. Yeah. And everything, but it really took until Caleb was born for me to heal from that first birth. It was just...
A lot of people will say, most importantly, baby's here and healthy, mom is here and healthy, which I totally agree with. But I also think it can exist at the same time as having some trauma around that and being like, I don't know how I feel about my birth experience.
Yeah.
And I feel sometimes it's hard for people to heal from that because they're like, no, I should just be grateful that everyone's here and healthy. But healing through that is such an individual process. But to hear that it took until your second birth to be like, oh.
Yeah. Long story short, my husband had developed a lot of medical issues that were kind of unexplained a year after we got married. So that kind of led us down a much more holistic path, which has been wonderful. And in Chinese medicine, they say that illness is a gift. And now we understand that because he was really sick with all this unexplained everything. And that set us on this much more holistic path. Now we're much healthier. Our house is a much healthier home, and our boys, we know that we're raising our boys in a way that they will be much healthier growing up than had this not happened. But because of that, I was like, I'm going to do this naturally. Like, I'm going to do this unmedicated and everything's going to be great. And then it was not at all what I expected.
Right. And were you prepped at all for the other side of that? Or were you just like, there's a plan A and that's it?
Yeah, that's kind of how I was. I'm going to focus on this and that's what's going to happen. But I wasn't even, in hindsight, I wasn't even focusing on it. Like, I had no idea how labor and delivery, how to mentally prepare myself for it. Like, I had no idea. So that was my plan. And I went into it blindly. And I didn't have a plan B. And it was just, like, in hindsight, I'm like, wow, that was stupid. I'll never know why that happened the way it did, but that's the way it happened. And yeah, it was definitely a lot, and it was not what I expected. But despite all of the crazy, despite the difficulties nursing afterward, and I had low supply, and he actually lost weight. Not just right out of the hospital, lost weight a little bit later because my supply was so low. I didn't realize it. And again, we weren't able to just bring him to the pediatrician. They would be like, okay, let's do a video call because everybody was so scared about everything. There was an appointment that I was like, I don't want to go. I do not feel good about leaving the house right now. I just want, because I remember going to the pediatrician's office and you are like new mom, completely in a fog. My baby didn't sleep. I didn't sleep. I'm in pain from having this C-section. It was a mess. Yeah, we go into the hospital. We go into the doctor's office. So we go into the doctor's office and they've got signs everywhere. And okay, I'm a graphic designer. So I'm like, don't they know that? And of course they don't know, right? But I'm like, don't they know that you can't look at 17 different signs on the door at the same time? Like, come on, right? 101. I was like, come on, guys. Like, I'm not reading nobody's reading all this because they're like shuffling you in. They take your temperature and then they shuffle you in. So we go in, we meet with the doctor. She wants me to nurse in a chair with no arms, which for a brand new mom who hasn't nursed before, with my second, I was like, sure. Like, I'm like walking around doing chores in the house and nursing. I was like, okay. We do the whole appointment. At that point, he was fine, but this was the very first appointment and his weight was fine and everything. And we go to leave and the woman behind the desk was like, don't come any closer. And she was like, didn't you read the sign? And I was like, which one? There's a million signs in the waiting room. I don't know the one that's supposed to keep me behind this line until you're ready and you can put your mask on and put your the glass partition up. And I was like, I had a baby a week ago. Don't yell at me. What are you doing? Yeah, this is horrible. So it was so terrible. And so I think the next appointment I was like, I don't feel comfortable. Just talk to them on the phone. That's stressful. Yeah. So despite all of that, he's doing wonderfully. Yeah. But yeah.
Does he like being a big brother?
He does. He was funny when I was pregnant with Caleb because people would ask him oh, you're going to be a big brother. Are you excited? And he was almost 3 when Caleb was born. So he started saying to Rich and I later in the day or at dinner time, he'd be like, I'm tired of being a big brother.
This is tough already.
Yeah. He was like, why are people asking baby this.
That's so cute.
So we're like, okay, we'll see. But then when Caleb arrived, he just wanted to snuggle up next to him. He's really great with him.
Aww.
He doesn't know his own strength, but he's really great with him. And luckily, Caleb is a pretty big baby, and I did not have any issues nursing, so he gained quickly, and
he's a hardy guy.
Pretty durable. So yeah, because Colton's like, I'm hugging him, and he's like swinging him around. Luckily, when he was really tiny, he was very gentle.
Right. Hey, you know, he's learning his role.
Yeah. So, but yeah, he's a good big brother. He's sweet.
So fast forward to Caleb's pregnancy, birth story, a little bit different?
Very different. Very, very different. So Caleb, we got pregnant right away with Caleb.
You were trying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we were trying, but so one of the bonuses about nursing is that I didn't get my period again until Colton was 2, almost 2. So, and then we were like, all right, we have a 2-year-old, and I got pregnant right away when we tried. My pregnancy with him was easy. I didn't have any weird ultrasounds. I was still stressed out because, I don't know, some people handle pregnancy really, really well, and others, I feel I was somewhere and then I wasn't super stressed out, but I did find it stressful not being able to see what was going on inside.
Sure.
Right? So it's always like, okay, is baby okay? Is everything okay? And then I had this stress of, how do I want to deliver this baby? Because a lot of people in my life were like, oh, you'll just have another C-section. And I was kind of like, I don't know, because I never really wanted to have a C-section. And I didn't want a repeat of the first. Theoretically, I would have rather had a C-section than go through everything I pushed for 3 hours with Colton. So that was exhausting. So going through labor, pushing for 3 hours, and yeah, I had an epidural, but they backed the epidural off, and you feel a lot when you're pushing, which you're supposed to, but it's very painful. And I did it for 3 hours before it was, okay, we have to just get the baby out. But I didn't want a repeat of that. I didn't want a repeat of not being able to hold the baby right away. I didn't want to not remember nursing and all of those things. But I also didn't want the drugs. So I went to the same midwife office that I went to originally. And they were so I wasn't going to be able to deliver him if I wanted to do a VBAC, which I wasn't sure at the time. But I wasn't going to be able to have a VBAC at that office because that hospital had just started offering VBACs. And they basically put you in a calculator based on your BMI, the reason why you didn't deliver vaginally to begin with, and something else. They put you in a calculator. If you get 70 or above, then you can.
I didn't know BMI was still used for anything.
Yeah, right?
I thought we just counted that. Okay.
Not as of 2 years ago.
Right.
So yeah, it was ridiculous. And the midwife, again, same midwife that I liked from the first time around, that I wonder what would have happened if she had been in the hospital with me with Colton's delivery, but she wasn't. But she was like, yeah, basically like, this calculator is bullshit. But she was like, but if you decide you want to do a VBAC, you're going to have to go present your case to this board of doctors at the hospital, and they would decide. And I was like, this does not feel good at all. I don't know if that's what I want to do. I don't know if I want to have another C-section. I don't know what I want to do, but that did not feel good to me at all.
Yeah, who wants to fight their case?
Yeah,
while you're
I was like, I'm such an introvert to begin with. This whole process is so uncomfortable right now. Like, I'm not, like, that's just a level of stress. Like, you don't need extra stress when you're pregnant. Like,
no.
Stress does a lot of really awful things to your body. Like, you don't need that. So I was like, okay, so I'm talking to my husband about it because he wasn't even allowed to be at the appointments with me, with Caleb. But I think he was, he was allowed to be, but they counted Colton as like another adult in the room. So we weren't allowed to all be there because we didn't have somebody every time I wasn't going to ask somebody to watch my kid every time. Like, we don't have family super close. So some of the bigger appointments, I had a friend watch Colton, but you go to a lot of appointments when you're pregnant. So I go home and I'm telling him this, and I was like, do I switch? So then I start going down that rabbit hole of finding another practice. And there was one practice that came up a few times that people had really great experiences with. So I call them and I get an appointment in. Didn't even ask if they did VBACs. Like, I just assumed that they did. So I get there and I met with this absolutely lovely midwife. Like, there was definitely a reason that I needed to be at that practice at that time, because she was the first person that listened to my story, and she was like, I'm not telling you what to do. She was like, she had had, I think, 5 natural births. She had became a midwife. Yeah, she had 5 natural births. She was like, I know what stress can do to your body when you're pregnant and when you're laboring. She was like, I had one birth in particular that it was a stressful situation. And she's like, it was more painful. It was longer. She was like, I know what it can do. And I feel like if you don't try for a VBAC, you may regret it. And that was the first person in the medical community that was like, that didn't give me like this like kind of BS, like, oh, well, your pelvis might be too small, or which now I understand is actually really rare. The Ina May's Guide to Childbirth is the most amazing book. And reading that, I actually prepared myself for Caleb's birth. I read books about labor and delivery. I did all of those things. And that was such a huge takeaway, was when she was like, it's actually really rare that a woman's pelvis is too small to deliver their baby. So she was the first person that was like, so I had read the book after that, but this midwife was the first person that was like, yeah, I think you can do this. And then I was like, okay. I went home and I was thinking about it, and I was like, okay, maybe I really can do this. And then,
just to have that encouragement.
Yeah, it was
incredible.
She was so amazing.
Yeah.
So I was sad to leave that practice because she was so great. And I stuck around for a little bit because I was trying to figure out kind of like where to go next at that point.
And
like,
how far along were you here?
I was in my 2nd trimester. Yeah. So, and I was nervous. I'm going to keep skipping around to different practices. And my husband's like, it's fine. They don't care. They're not even going to notice if you leave. And I was like, well, what if I leave and then I come back because I go to one that is worse and then I want to go back to the other one? And he's like, they don't care. Like, it's fine. And I was like, okay.
Thanks for the perspective, honey.
Yeah. I was like, I don't really believe you, but okay. It'll be fine, I guess.
Yes.
So again, going down another rabbit hole of trying to find another doctor. And in the meantime, I have other appointments. So I'm still continuing with this practice, but knowing that I probably will not stay there. So another midwife was suggested finding a doula, which I had kind of gone down the road with a little bit. And then I was having trouble. So Caleb was due on December 21st. So it was hard to find a doula. It was hard to find anybody, really. I mean, there was another midwife practice that I wanted to go to, and they were like, yeah, we're closing for the holiday. And I was like, okay, can't go there. So there were just some roadblocks where I'd be like, okay, maybe it's not meant to happen like this. It kind of had me questioning. So I had kind of gone down that road about finding a doula, and I met a couple no's. I'm getting like close to the end of my 2nd trimester. And so we're very pregnant at that time. I connected with a couple different doulas who, they were busy. They either had other patients or they were taking time off for Christmas. But luckily I found one doula who was like, I'm not available, but let me check my network and I'll get back to you. And luckily a few days later, she got back to me and she was like, I have this woman. She's a doula. I've worked with her before. She's wonderful. She's available. So I email this doula. She gets back to me. She's like, let's set up a Zoom call. And she was like, I'm Jewish. She's like, I don't care when your baby's born. And I was like, that's awesome.
Perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. And I was like, so this is the practice that I'm with. This is the hospital that they would send me to. I'd have to switch practices because they don't do VBACs. And at that point I was like, this is what I really want. I want an unmedicated VBAC. That's what I want. I not want to have a C-section. I know that that's possible. I know it's possible that I will have the same thing happen again. But at that point I was like, this is how I want to do this. Even though I was super nervous. And so I was definitely stressed out. My husband was like, you have to believe you can do this. And I was like, I don't know if I can. It was a lot. But I had this doula, and she was wonderful. And we met a few times over Zoom, and she was teaching me breathing techniques and going over different positions to be in and things like that. So I had a little bit of muscle memory, so that when I was in the moment and she was coaching me through it, like,
open your knees now.
Yeah, right. She was like a drill sergeant in
the best way.
In the best way. She was amazing. But yeah, so she was like, do you really want to deliver at that hospital? And I was like, no. I was like, oh, what, like, where do I go? So she pointed me in the direction of a practice. I never thought I wouldn't be with a midwife, but she was like, this practice, this particular doctor, she's amazing. She's on the crunchier side. She's not going to push medication on you. And I was like, okay. So I go there, and I think I was either at the very end of my second trimester or beginning of my third trimester.
So pretty far along.
Yeah,
to be switching.
I was like, I hope that they let me in. Like I don't know how this works.
You're too pregnant.
Yeah, right? Like, I was like, I don't know how this works. She must have like a following, because it was not easy to like, they were like, yeah, we can squeeze you in at this time. And then they had me set up all my appointments for the rest of my pregnancy, because they were like, she fills up quickly. So I was like, okay.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, exactly. But she was wonderful. She was super laid back. She would tell me, okay, this is what I think, but it's up to you. And let me make my own decisions. She was happy to give her opinion, but she never pushed in. She didn't keep questioning.
Once no was no, or
yeah,
yes
exactly.
Yes.
No was no. Exactly. She was really great, and she didn't push unnecessary ultrasounds or anything like that. It was just so much smoother. My pregnancy with Caleb was just smoother to begin with. Nobody found anything weird on an ultrasound.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it was just...
Speaking of, was his leg shorter than the other?
No, it was not. Exactly. Exactly. His legs were the same size.
I'm sure, he would be just as precious if so, but...
Exactly. He still would have come out the same way.
Right.
I'm not sure how that would have been helpful to know when I was pregnant. They tell you the craziest things when you're pregnant. With Colton, they were like, your baby's head is in the 90th percentile. And I was like, why would you tell that to
makes
a
me feel
pregnant
great.
woman?
Thanks.
Like, great. I have to deliver this baby, but thank you.
Can't
Thank
wait.
you. Would you tell that to a pregnant woman with their first kid? Oh, so anyway, so I had this doula. She was lovely, and she sent me to this other practice that was really
a
great.
Good fit.
Yeah, it was a much better fit. I felt like I finally had my ducks in a row in the third trimester.
Any suggestions for people who are just, they're nearing, let's say, third trimester, and they're having issues with their practitioner?
Just switch, because you can always go back.
There you go.
I was nervous to keep switching, keep jumping around, but I'm so glad I did. Yeah, I'm so glad I did. If I stuck with, I don't think I would have had the same experience that I stuck with a different practice. So
that's good to hear.
Yeah, so that was a much better spot, much more laid back, and we just kind of rode out the rest of the pregnancy. As I got to 40 weeks, though, well, a little bit before that, they didn't quite wait till 40 weeks to talk to me about this, but they were like, so the backup plan, because they don't want to, and I didn't know this until reading that book, that if you had a C-section, the safer thing to do is not to chemically induce you. So I believe it's still done. I know people who have had that happen, but it can be really dangerous because you have chemically created contractions instead of natural contractions. So the contractions are much, much more intense, which can increase the risk of that scar tearing, which would be disastrous. So anyway, so they were like, we're not going to do that. We're not going to induce you. You either have to go on your own, or we're going to have to do a C-section. Basically, they were like, you have until like 41 and 1, which was much better than a lot of practices. I hear stories all the time that they don't even want you hitting 40 weeks. So I was like, okay, like 41 and 1. Okay. And I had the benefit of it being the holidays and stuff. So I probably could have very easily not been able to get in. Right. So he was due December 21st. Did not come on December 21st. So 2 days later in the morning, I was scheduled to have my non-stress test. And I was like, I don't want to go to this. Even though his pregnancy was so much smoother, I was having all the bad memories about, like, okay, they're going to send me to the hospital. And I just did not want to have that test again. So the night before the test, I'm on the phone with my doula and I'm kind of panicking. So I was like, I don't want to have this test done. I don't want to talk about C-sections. She's like, babies like to come when you're relaxed. Right. I'm like, okay.
Good reminder.
So, yeah. All right. That was late afternoon. And then around 7 o'clock, Colton was in the living room playing, and we were just hanging out in the living room, and I had like a little bit of lower back pain. And earlier that week I would have contractions through the night and they'd go away. And then Rich brings Colton up to bed. I'm cleaning up the kitchen or whatever. And I was like, okay, this is starting to feel a little bit different. And maybe around 8, 9 o'clock, I texted my doula and I was like, I think I'm in labor. Because it was more intense than earlier in the week when I would just have like subtle contractions. Okay, I think I'm in labor. And so I wake up Rich and we start timing my contractions, and they were only 7 minutes apart at that point. It was happening really quickly comparatively than with Colton. And I was like, no. I was like, the timer must be wrong.
It's counting seconds wrong.
He was like, are you joking? And I was like, no. Like, it can't be happening this quickly because I'm just supposed to labor at home for a long time. Like, you remember what happened with Colton, right? I was in labor forever and then I didn't even progress. So, and it's getting closer and closer. It was 11 o'clock and I was like, okay, I think we need to have your sister come over and be with Colton because we're back and forth with the doula and she's checking on progress and everything over the phone because she was going to meet us at the hospital when we were ready. And then I got to 5 minutes apart and we were 45 minutes away from the hospital. And it's December in upstate New York. It's rainy outside and icy. It's like not the best outside. And by then I was having like real contractions. Thankfully we had met with our acupuncturist and she taught us acupressure points. Nice. So yeah, that saved me because I was having a lot of back labor, which I had with Colton as well. I just didn't know what it was at the time. So now I recognized I knew what it was, and Rich was able to press on acupressure points on my lower back and that every contraction, and that helped immensely. It was amazing. It was still painful, but it was manageable. So we're 5 minutes apart and we're like, okay, like we're talking to my doula and she heard me go through one of my contractions. She was like, okay, I think it's time. Yeah, I think we're ready. And she was pretty laid back about it, but we're like, okay, we're ready. So Rich calls my doctor's office and they're like, well, all of the hospitals in the area are diverting. So
just what you want to hear.
So he's like, so what do we do? And they're like, well, you're going to go to this hospital now. And I was like, are they VBAC friendly? Once I figured out what was going on in between contractions and laying in bed. And she was like, yeah, that's why you're going to that particular hospital. And I was like, okay. And my husband was like, all right, I think I know where it is. Let's go. So his sister comes over and we grab our bags and poor Colton woke up. He's crying. He's so upset that we're leaving. And it's the middle of the night. He's like half awake. It was awful. Felt so bad. But we finally get out of the house and I'm like, okay, we got to go have a baby. So sorry, buddy.
We'll be right back.
You hang out with Aunt Michelle. We'll be back. So we drive to the hospital. It's raining. It's so gross out. We almost hit a snow owl on the way. It like flies in front of the car and we're like, what?
A snow owl. I've been wanting to see one of those for years.
Yeah, and we've never seen one before ever. And we're like, what the hell was that?
Of all times.
It almost hits the windshield of the car.
Oh my gosh.
It was insane. We're like, okay, we're going. We get there. My doula meets us there, and we're in the waiting room. And the woman behind the desk was like, so I don't have you on the list or anything. And we're like, well, we were supposed to deliver here. They sent us here. And she's like, oh, I didn't know this.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, okay. Well, I'm here now, and I'm very much in labor. So
I'm trying to stay relaxed. Find me a room.
Yeah, I was just like, well, we're not going anywhere else. So I'm, like Rich and my doula are taking turns doing my acupressure points every time I had a contraction. And I'm like 3-4 minutes apart at this point. So they get the paperwork straightened out. And she was lovely, but nobody informed her about the whole situation. So
I'm glad they got it sorted out.
Yeah, they got it sorted out. We get in the elevator with 2 cops. We were like, what's going on?
I know. Oh my gosh.
What's going on in this hospital right now? But they were very calm. They were like, how you doing?
Okay.
Second baby, we're going. Very much in labor.
What are you here for, sir?
Yeah, I was like, glad you guys are calm because I hope this isn't some serious situation. Don't know what's going on.
Oh my gosh.
We got again to the room, get dressed into the lovely hospital gown and the nurse checks me and she's like, so you're 4 centimeters. And I was like, are you kidding me? Rich said he saw the blood drain from my face. Because I was like, I was 4 centimeters with Colton and I wasn't even in labor.
Right.
Like, this is 3 minutes apart at that point. Like in labor. I was like, no, I'm really in labor because they don't count it unless you're at 6 centimeters as being active labor. So I'm like, okay, but this is really painful. And that's 3 o'clock in the morning. My doula's like, all right, let's go out to the hallway. You're gonna.
She put you to work.
Yeah. She was a drill sergeant. She was awesome. She was amazing. So she's having me do squats in the hallway. She's having me swinging my hips around. And she's like, if you feel a contraction coming on, just lean against the bar on the wall. We'll do your pressure points. So she was wonderful. So we do the loop around the hall. I don't know how long it took us to do that. So we do the loop. We go back to the room and she's having me change positions and do all, like, she's like working on all these things with me. And 2 hours later, she noticed that I was in transition, but I didn't know it. She goes to the nurse. She was like, can you check her? And I was at 10 centimeters. It's like, how did that happen in 2 hours? Like, that's amazing.
You worked hard.
So yeah, it was a lot of hard work, but it was like, I was like, I did it. Like, I got to 10 centimeters on my own. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So that was awesome. So she was like, okay. So then I forget what they call it. They call it like pushing, but it's not coached pushing. I forget what the term is. But I did that for an hour. Yep. Just kind of like feeling my body through and everything. So that was an hour just to get the baby a little bit, I guess, closer. I don't know. And then it was time for coached pushing. So she gets me in, I don't even remember what position I started in. They had like a bar up and all of these things. So we're doing that. And she was so wonderful because we talked about the things that I was okay with and not okay with. She just kept changing my position.
And was this the doctor or was this the doula?
The doula. Kind of,
okay.
The doula. So like they had, she just walked me through everything. I firmly believe that it would not have happened as quickly or as just seamlessly had she not been there coaching me through everything. And like, I'm pretty stubborn. I really wanted this particular birth experience. And so as painful as it was when she would be like, okay, can you move your ankle up 2 inches? And like, that sounds very easy right now. But when you're in very active labor, I remember I called her evil at one point. I was like, you have 3 kids. Why would you do this 3 times? What are things you say when you're in labor?
It's from the depths.
Yeah, it really is. Like, you have very few words during labor. And that's
you make them count.
But yeah, like moving your leg 2 inches is like Everest when you're in that state.
And it makes so much of a difference. People don't realize. People think you have to do these drastic movements, but it's like move your knee a little bit and you're like opening new things that you didn't know.
It's amazing. And I don't know this stuff. I mean, she had us do a lot of prep work before. I wouldn't even say a lot. She had us do some prep work before. She didn't make a big deal out of anything or whatever, but like that's the stuff that when you're in labor, you're not gonna be like, hey, what was that thing that I read?
Right.
You know, like.
And you shouldn't have to be either. Like you should be in your zone.
Yeah, exactly.
And then your support people should be there to direct the rest.
Yep. It was amazing. And she made sure Rich was really involved too. So she would tell him what to do and everything. So it wasn't just me and her. We're not having the baby together. But she was amazing. And so she would coach him through things and then he would take a break or he would do something. She would tell him what to do and then she would do something else on the other side of me or whatever. So she was just amazing. And I don't know how people have babies without doulas after that situation. Like, it was awesome. And she was really great too, because we talked about my expectations and I told her about with Colton, these nurses in the corner talking about their lunch break. And I was like, I was super uncomfortable with that. So she made sure that anybody who came in the room introduced themselves to me. I remember when she was like, hey, so there's this resident here who's learning. Is it okay if they're if they come in. And I didn't want male doctors in because I always end up with an arrogant male doctor, frankly. I always end up with that guy. So I was like, as long as it's a female, I don't care. just don't pair me with the arrogant male doctor, please. But yeah, she made sure everybody introduced themselves. There weren't extra people in the room.
And just asking you and knowing that you can decline is incredible. That's the power back in your hands.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was so wonderful that she was able to, anytime she would see, okay, the door's opening up. Is this person somebody who we know or not? And then she would make sure that they introduced themselves.
That's great.
And everything. She was so wonderful. And she made sure the lights stayed really low.
Good.
She had these little fairy lights in the room. And at one point they were checking me with the fairy lights because I was like, I can't handle all the bright lights.
Right.
So just things like that I might not be able to communicate. My husband might not think to communicate it. Or he's there to be with me, but he can't be focused on everything.
Right.
And she's this neutral party who can make sure they're not shining bright lights in my eyes.
Right. Something so small can make such a big difference.
And she knows what's acceptable and what's not.
Right.
You know, there's things that maybe I would have said no to, or she's like, no, that's kind of how it is.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Understanding both worlds.
Yeah, exactly. So it was just great to have that bridge. So anyways, we're doing all these different positions. The doctors come in and out, and the nurse comes in and out, and the nurse was switched. And I had this really just such a sweet nurse. And then this other nurse came in, and she was definitely not warm and fuzzy. I remember she was looking at me. She's just like, I want to see a little more progress. And I was like, what? I've been pushing for 2 hours. You want to see more progress? I actually thought she was really wonderful afterward.
Yeah.
But I was like, what?
Not the best first impression, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. My doula looks at me and she's like, okay. And Rachel looks at me and she's like, who the heck is this? But she actually ended up being really great. But yeah, so it was an hour of involuntary pushing and 2 hours of real pushing. And the doctor was really great. And not my doctor, because we're at the hospital, but she was really great. And I remember being like, am I making progress? And she goes, this is how you're having your baby. And I was like, okay. It was amazing. I was so grateful. Okay, this is working. This is how I'm going to have a baby. And
for that peace of mind.
Yeah.
And that encouragement. So you're like, I can do this.
Yeah.
I got this.
Exactly.
We're doing it.
Exactly. I was like, I don't have to question this anymore. This is how the baby's coming out. And it was 3 hours total of pushing. And he came out and we found out it was a boy, which was awesome. We really wanted 2 boys. But my first feeling was like, oh my God, I did it. I did it. Right. I was so excited. And everything was my vision was almost fuzzy because they had this bright light on the baby and I just saw this glowing ball. I didn't even see the baby really. But he had the cord wrapped around his neck twice. So they're doing that. I'm looking, but I don't even know what's going on. Right. So they unwrapped the cord and he was totally fine. He was perfect. And yeah, my husband was like, it's a boy. I was so excited. And I had the moment of the baby got put on my chest and he started nursing after 5 minutes.
He was ready to go.
Yeah, he's super responsive. He was awesome. No issues. I felt amazing. Obviously, I knew everything was going to be swollen because the first time I had a C-section, but I also pushed for 3 hours. So you kind of have both issues. So yeah, I remember with Colton, the nurses were like, yeah, you kind of like you had 2 births. I remember everything stung and then they did the afterbirth, but I just didn't care. I was so happy that that's how the baby was born. I was so happy to have this baby on my chest because I know that doesn't happen every time. So I just didn't care. It's not comfortable having them do the placenta and everything, but I was like, oh, whatever. And then I guess I had the tiniest little tear. And they were like, okay, we're going to put a stitch in it. And honestly, my doula was like, probably didn't even need it. But at that point, I think they just wanted to probably leave the room. And, so I'm like, whatever. Yeah, it was awesome. It was very healing too. I feel that's when I was able to just heal from Colton's birth and that being this, I don't know exactly why that happened, but maybe it happened for a reason. And that's why I was so determined to have Caleb this way. I don't know. And I felt great afterward.
Which is crazy to hear. So What was the stay like? How long did you have to stay for your C-section? And then how long did you stay in the hospital for?
So
vaginal
with
birth?
Colton, he was born on Thursday and we left Sunday morning. It was weird. It was a weird time because they didn't want people in the hospital really.
Right.
But I remember
That's
Saturday I could have left, but my nurses were like, she's not ready.
Did you feel ready?
No.
Okay.
No, I didn't feel ready at all. I was so overwhelmed with this baby that I couldn't latch him on my own. The nurses were helping me latch him to nurse and everything. I was like, processing a C-section and in pain. And it was so much all at once. And then it's like, people are walking in the room with masks on. And I'm like, what is going on? Like,
yeah, you don't know the state of the world at that point.
Yeah, exactly. It was just so strange. So yeah, so we went home Sunday morning. We were like, okay, now what do we do with this baby?
Right.
I was like, where are the nurses?
And you're trying to heal and...
Yeah, it was wild. Caleb, he was born on December 23rd and we went home Christmas Eve evening.
Okay.
So we got to wake up at home and I was ready. We were fine. Nursing was going well and and I was ready to get home and wake up on Christmas morning with Colton and all of us. So it was really sweet that the next morning we were able to have like a nice little Christmas at home with new baby and Colton got to open his gifts and everything. It was really sweet.
And how was postpartum how old was Colton?
Colton was almost 3. So he's a March baby and Caleb's December. So he was 3 the following March.
So how was postpartum with a newborn and then...
it was a little, kids are always crazy. I feel like no matter how many you have.
That's fair. You already have one.
Yeah, but he was good. He was really gentle with Caleb and everything. I didn't really have to worry too much about him. He was old enough to not really understand, but old enough that he wasn't trying to bury the baby under all of his toys or anything. I didn't have to worry about if I put Caleb on the floor on a blanket, and Colton was aware enough that he wasn't going to do anything crazy or try.
Best case.
Yeah, I feel their age gap is really good actually. And it could just be the way Colton is too. He was really great with him. He already got the whole potty thing, so I wasn't doing that while I was with an infant. Like that's not super fun when you're pregnant either, but but at least it was
done.
Yeah. So that was done. And Caleb was a super laid back baby. He would just nurse and fall asleep in my lap and I could read stories to Colton or whatever. So he was just so laid back and just very sleepy. And I say that, but he also was smiling really early. So when he was awake, he was very animated. And yeah, he's a little charmer. He smiles at everyone. Honestly, the second time around with a newborn and a toddler was a lot easier than the first time with just a newborn when we just didn't know what we were doing. It was just a crazy time in the world too. And Colton wasn't as sleepy of a baby. Nobody was sleeping. It was much easier the second time around, even with having a toddler.
Anything else you want to reflect back on, or any advice you'd give to expecting moms?
I think one of the big things that I like to share is that you have to choose your heart. So whether you decide to get an epidural or some other type of medication, because there's a lot of things out there, whether you decide to be induced or whether you decide to have a natural unmedicated birth, there's hard in all of it. It's not like, okay, I'm going to just get a scheduled C-section. They're going to open me up and everything's going to be no big deal. Not that I want to instill fear in people, but there's things about all of them. None of it is perfectly easy, right? Yeah, an unmedicated birth, it's hard when you're in it. Luckily, I felt amazing afterwards, so it didn't matter. Yeah, exactly. So the baby was born and that was it. The pain was done. Like, I was swollen and sore, but the pain was done. With my C-section, I was in pain for weeks. I was really sore. I couldn't do a lot of things. I've heard even if you have an epidural and without a C-section, if you have an epidural with a vaginal delivery, I have friends and people in my life who had lower back pain from the epidural spot. And so there's always something, So I would say if you're feeling like you want to have a natural birth, go for it, because it's really amazing afterward to just be able to feel like you have your baby and you have that baby high that's not fogged by any kind of medication or anything. That was the most amazing feeling. Like, I wish I could bottle it up. That just amazing high that you have after having your baby, and the pain goes away, which is awesome. So yeah, it's hard during it, but it ends. And you also are more likely to progress faster through pushing and everything. I mean, an epidural can definitely slow down how long you're pushing for. And there's positive and negative things for all of it, but I mean, do some research and don't go into it blindly like I did my first time around. That was not smart. Yeah, do your research, hire a doula, and have a really good support team for you and your baby and your partner. And so you have, just have a good support team.
Yeah, we create that village.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
That we used to have so long ago, and it's just not really a thing now.
Yeah, it's not. So don't feel bad about not having that instinct, because these things aren't passed down like they were at one time.
Yeah. So, gotta learn it while you're in it sometimes, unfortunately.
Yeah. And definitely do the prep work too. Learn as much as you can, and without over learning. I tend to be an over researcher too. Same. To some degree, which is funny that I didn't do that with labor and delivery the first time around. And I just was so focused on, what do we do when the baby's here?
Right. Well, it's got to get here.
Exactly. It's got to get here. So,
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories. This was great. Really enjoyed having you on here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in on Pregnant Tea. I hope you've enjoyed listening to wisdom from our community of mothers and experts. If you want more relatable stories and empowering advice, head over to www.nswellness.net to subscribe for the latest content. Until next time, take care of yourself.